Hey super friends, Jake here from the Brave and the Boys, and today we have my favorite video of the year, my top 10, my updated top 10 list of my favorite absolutes. As you guys know, absolutes are my favorite way to collect. If I was an anime character, my ultimate dream would be to collect every absolute, and I hope to do that someday. But this is my list of the top 10 absolutes that you need to read. Now, before we get started, go ahead and smash that like button. Comment down below what your favorite absolute is. Go ahead and click that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. And I want to say a huge thanks to our sponsor, Organic Price Books, who helped make this possible by contributing a fair amount of these absolutes. There, if you want to pick up any of these books, you can save $2 with the code Braveboys. Or if you're buying 4 or more, you can save 5% with the code Braveboyssit. So without further ado, let's dive in.
Deep within a bleak and dismal swamp, hidden beneath its murky waters, lies the headquarters of the most sinister villains of all time. The Legion of Doom.
Coming in hot at number 10 is an absolute that I didn't read until this year. That is the magnum opus of Warren Ellis and John Cassidy from the Wildstorm imprint, Absolute Planetary. Now, I wasn't sure I was gonna love Planetary because I read Absolute Authority, and honestly, it wasn't really my cup of tea, but I'm so happy that I read it. Planetary ran from April 1999 all the way up to October 2009. The Planetary books are gonna follow the Archaeologists of the Impossible, the Planetary team, which are led by a secret member known as the Fourth Man. The members that we do get to meet are Jaquita, she's like super strong, super fast. There's the drummer, who's like a technopath, and then a new recruit, Elijah Snow. Elijah has all these crazy ice powers, like he can kill you just by looking at you. He's just really badass. But it is a really cool story. So basically, Warren Ellis wanted to make a love letter to the superhero genre as a whole. So you're gonna get little love letters to Godzilla, Tarzan, Sherlock Holmes, Doc Strange, the Lone Ranger, the Green Hornet, like everything. There's the Fantastic Four ripoffs, there's Superman, but ripoffs isn't the right word. They're homages, they're covers, and it just tells an awesome story from beginning to end. There's 27 issues. There's a crossover with the Authority, a crossover with Batman that shows why Batman's so important, and a crossover with the JLA. But if you're looking for a complete standalone story, you got to check out Absolute Planetary. Now, this is the second version of the Absolutes. The original Absolutes were 2-volume, and this has to be like one of the chunkiest Absolutes, but I love it. Now let's jump into number 9. Coming in at number 9, we have a book that thankfully was just reprinted, and this was gifted to us by our friends at Organic Price Books. Remember, you can save $2 with the code Braveboys. But Dark Knight Returns, it's a magnum opus, it's a classic. It was the first book we ever covered on our podcast together. And oh my God, half of this book is a must read. So The Dark Knight, which is the portion of this book that's on my list, the second part of this book, not on my list, but the first portion of this book was the 1986 miniseries starring Batman, written by Frank Miller, illustrated by Miller and Klaus Janson, with colors by Lynn Varley. Tells the story of a 55-year-old retired Batman, like who's kind of beat down and kind of older and grisly, and he has to come out of retirement to show them how it's done. Some of the coolest moments are when Batman has to go up against his famous rogues like Two-Face or the Joker, but then there's new villains such as the Mutant Gang, where Batman just puts the beat down on him. It's an all-out brawl, and you definitely want to check out the first half. Now, the reason I say this, I didn't own this book before, even though it was so good, is the second half has the controversial and much maligned sequel, The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Now, that'll be a video for another day. Trust me, you can buy this book and just read the first half, and you should read the second half because it's fun, but it is nowhere near the levels of greatness of the first half. With all that being said, it would probably be higher on my list if this was just The Dark Knight, but it still comes in cool at number 9. Now let's move on to number 8. Coming in at number 8, we have the magnum opus of Mark Waid and Alex Ross, Absolute Kingdom Come. Now, that shows you how stacked this list is, because I feel like a lot of people would put this as their number 1 absolute, and that's because the Alex Ross art, whether it's Justice or Justice League, the World's Greatest Superheroes, or Kingdom Come, you gotta get that Alex Ross art in the largest format possible. I mean, you should see some of the formats of Marvels that they've created that are like as big as my entire bookshelf that you see here. But in 1994, Alex Ross was working on Marvels, and he got the idea of doing a magnum opus for DC, and that's when he wrote the outline to Kingdom Come. He went to DC and they paired him with Mark Waid because of his extensive knowledge on the history of all these DC characters, and they came out with one of the coolest storylines ever. So Kingdom Come tells the story of a darker, hypothetical Elseworlds future to the DC universe. In this grim future, Superman and the Justice League have mostly retired because Magog kills the Joker and the public doesn't punish him. They kind of reward him and cheer him, and Superman realizes that maybe he's not fit to be a hero anymore, so he retires. I think this tells a lot about where comics were at during this time. The 90s were all about grit and like angst, and I think you have the old guard of Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman having to come out of retirement to show these younger, more brutal, violent heroes what it really means to be a hero. There's awesome moments. It's told through a narrator that's actually based on Alex Ross's dad, and you get cool moments with Shazam, the Spectre, and you just get all these awesome, awesome character moments, and every page should just be in a museum. It's just the most gorgeous art you've ever seen. It's an amazing Superman story that shows why the old way of compassionate heroes is the right way. And what's cool about this book is you get to see its influences on even modern books. So they're doing a lot of awesome stuff that pulls from this with the World's Finest storyline currently coming out right now. And I think you all should read it to see where that inspiration comes from. Now let's move on to number 7. Coming in at number 7, we have to give it to the granddaddy of all the DC events, Absolute Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, this is a book I desperately hope they'll reprint someday. I think it's really cool. As you guys know, one of my collecting goals is to own every Crisis event in Absolute, but sadly, there's no 0 Hour Crisis. So I love this book. To me, this is the beginning of my continuity for DC. This was so monumental that it literally split the timeline of the DC universe into 2 sections, pre-crisis and post-crisis. So this came out in 1985 to 1986, written by Marv Wolfman, illustrated by the amazing George Perez, and this right here was designed to make the DC universe new reader friendly. So Marv Wolfman didn't like the multiverse. He thought it was hard for new readers to know where to start. So they had this big bombastic event that reset everything. Literally hundreds of characters die in this book, and it is crazy. It reset the status quo for decades to come. Now, once you read this, you can follow it up with a bunch of other DC Crisis events. If you want to watch how to read all the DC Crisis events in omnibus format, you can watch that video here. But what we have in Absolutes for now, we have Infinite Crisis, though I will say that's probably the one you want to read the omnibus for. Then there's Sinestro Core War, Final Crisis, Metal, and Death Metal. So I really hope we get a Dark Crisis Absolute someday. I hope we get a 0 Hour Absolute someday. I want to be able to read all of these DC events in the largest format possible, because these are really like the summer blockbuster events, and you want them on that giant page. So I think this book, while might not have aged as well as some other books, it's definitely important to have in your collection, and you should have it in the Absolute format. Now let's jump into number 6. Coming in at number 6 is a book we have covered a lot on this channel, but it had to be in my top 10 list. It is Absolute Watchmen. This came out in 1985 to 1986. It was done by the British duo of Alan Moore and artist Dave Gibbons, and it is considered by many to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, graphic novel of all time. Now, there's a lot of cool ways to collect Watchmen. If you want to see Jordan break down many of the formats of Watchmen, you can watch that here. To me, the grandiose way to collect this seminal work of superhero fiction is the Absolute Edition. The 9 panel grids are just giant, the art leaps off the page, and it is just a fantastic way to collect the story. Now, much has been said of the tumultuous history that led to the creation of this book. Originally, DC bought Charleston Comics, and Alan Moore submitted a proposal of a story to introduce those Charleston character comics into DC. However, when they read it, they were like, oh my god, that's crazy. You make most of the characters unusable. How about you create your own characters with Dave Gibbons? They were supposed to revert the rights to the Watchmen characters back to Alan Moore after the book went out of print. And famously, in 1987, Watchmen was collected into a trade paperback and has been in print ever since. Now, a lot of people are Watchmen only people. So as you can see, I didn't include any of the supplemental reading here. If you want to see all the different ways Watchmen has had their corpse dug up by DC and revisited, you can watch that video here of the collected Watchmen universe. Though I will say the best thing to follow up this book on is the HBO series. I love the HBO series. More people need to check it out. It was phenomenal. This deeply philosophical book, political book, it's satirizes the superhero genre. It's going to critique American government, and it shows what if the superheroes existed in the real world and what the consequences of that would be. I don't want to say anything more, but you should check it out and read for yourself. One of the greatest works of American fiction. Now, let's move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5, we have a book that I read last year for the first time, and I've read it like 3 times since. That is Absolute Day Tripper, done by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. It's going to center on the character Bras de Olivia Domingo, who is the son of a world famous author trying to get into the industry himself. He takes a job at being an obituary writer, and the story centers around important moments in his life, things that have to do about travel, family, loss, and love, the birth of a child, the loss of a parent, all these amazing, complex, beautiful, twisted, haunting moments of his life. And at the end of each moment, he dies. The question of each story is, what is the point of life? What is the reason for living? And to paraphrase my friend Chris, reading this book makes you feel like a better person. It's going to help you cherish life. It's going to help you understand love and relate to your family better. It made me feel like a better person. And honestly, while this isn't a blockbuster summer event like the Crisis Absolute, this is like that darling indie film that you also still want to see on the big screen because the art is just so beautiful and pure, and you got to check it out. Let's jump on to number 4. Coming in at number 4, we have what was originally my loftiest collector goal, to own all of Absolute Sandman. Sandman was written by Neil Gaiman and had a host of amazing artists. There's too many to list, but my favorite of them is J.H. Williams III in Overture. So the story of Sandman, told over 75 issues, is going to star Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, and he is the personification of the metaphysical concept of dreams. He has a whole family, so he has siblings of destruction, death, delirium, destiny, and it tells the story of Dream, who was imprisoned by mortals, realizing that eventually sometimes change is necessary. It is an amazing story about stories. So some of them are going to be stories that fit into the overarching narrative. Some of them are going to be one-off stories that showcase a different aspect of Dream or a different aspect of this world. And it is incredible. So it's going to be 4 absolutes for the 75 issue run of Sandman. There's a 5th absolute, which collects some of the secondary stories. Then there's Sandman Overture, which tells a prequel and explains how Morpheus got to the state he was at the beginning of the series. And one of my personal favorites, Absolute Death, which are a couple stories that focus on his sister Death. And all of these right here are just not even some of the best comics ever written, but some of the best stories ever written. Neil Gaiman was just on fire. And it's just one of those stories that you have to experience in the largest size ever. I mean, there's moments in Overture where I'm just like unfolding multiple pages and you're looking at a 4-page splash, and it's just absolutely astounding in this format. And it was just personally such an awesome goal to finally achieve, because I started collecting these as some of my first absolutes. I would save up for months and months. One of them would be out of print and it would come back. And it took me a couple years, but eventually I owned all of Absolute Sandman, and that led to my love of absolutes, and that led to everything that you see here. So everyone has to read Sandman. If you want to see other formats, you can collect Sandman and you can watch those videos here. But Sandman, this is the best format to own it in. Now let's jump into number 3. If you noticed my t-shirt, you knew this was going to be on the list. Coming in at number 3, we have, yes, it is an absolute. Put down in the comments below if you think I'm crazy and if this isn't an absolute, but to me it's an absolute. I call it Absolute JLA Avengers. This tells the crossover written by Kurt Busiek with art by George Perez that was done between 2003, 2004, and this was such a white whale for me. If you want to see the celebratory video I made after I finally got it, you can watch this video here. But as many of you know, this was a gift from my wife to me for being sober for over a year. I'm now at like 550 days, but I guess I don't get an absolute for 550 days just for a year. This is a 4-issue series that is the crossover between the Justice League and the Avengers. Now, they did announce Omnis for the other DC Marvel crossovers. This wasn't solicited yet. I really hope this comes back into print. I'm not one of those collectors that thinks just because I paid an arm and a leg for it, other people shouldn't get it for a good price. I want this to come back into print. They should, because you need to see the George Perez art in the largest format possible, and the story is incredible. The story begins with the villainous Krona, who comes from universe to universe, destroying them, seeking the meaning of life or the origin of creation. So Krona, on his quest to uncover the meaning of life and the meaning of creation, meets the Grand Master, who proposes a wager. What I love most about this is the interaction between the characters. It's just so like crazy to see Batman on the same panel as Captain America, but I also love how they critique each other's worlds. So when Superman, he takes it so personally. When he goes to the Marvel universe, he sees how the mutants are mistreated, and he sees that the heroes haven't made that world any better. But what's cool is you also get to see the Avengers perspective. Cap sees how the DC heroes are kind of like gods flying over the mortals, and they also aren't cool with that either. So it's a scathing critique of both of them, and through the 4 issues, you get incredibly powerful messages. You get awesome reality bending moments. Like, you get to see what if the Avengers and the Justice League have had a ton of crossovers and they've been friends for years. So it's an awesome story. I won't tell you anything more, but you got to read it, and read it in whatever format's available in. For Jordan's birthday last year, I got him a trade paperback. I really hope this story comes back into print, but if it does, you got to get in the absolute format. It's the best way to read it. Now let's jump into my second favorite. Our penultimate spot is taken by my biggest of white whales, Absolute Long Halloween, Dark Victory, and Haunted Night. I adore this series. I've talked about it countless times, and I'm going to talk about it one more time because, yeah, y'all knew this was going to be in my top 10 list. This was written by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. It's 13 issues of peak Batman. You get to see him being the world's greatest detective, being the Caped Crusader, and you get to see him battle against the mob, his entire rogues gallery, and the mysterious holiday killer who kills a victim on each holiday, leaving behind a little gift. So that is an incredible storyline. Tim Sale's art, his whole Gotham is just fantastic, and it was followed up in Haunted Night, which were 3 Halloween spin-offs, and Catwoman When in Rome, as well as the sequel Dark Victory, which tells the origin of Robin and has my favorite panel in all of comics. But yeah, I've beat this horse dead. It is, in my mind, the definitive Batman story. If you read it in any format, there's the deluxe editions with names that are way too long. There's the omnibus that was one of my first omnis ever. I mean, I dreamed about owning these in the past, but I never thought it was possible. I saved and I hunted and I scrounged, and I eventually got all 3 of them, and I'm so happy that I did, and I hope that these get reprinted. Again, I want everybody to read these stories in the best format possible. That Tim Sale art just is grandiose, and you have to see it in the biggest size possible. And to me, this is the ultimate Batman storyline. Now, we move to my number 1 pick. And that brings us to my favorite DC Absolute. Not even my favorite DC Absolute, but my favorite DC story, Absolute New Frontier. This is an Eisner, Harvey, Schuster award-winning 6-issue limited series written and drawn by the late, great Darwin Cook and published by DC in 2004. This is everything amazing about comics, everything amazing about DC, and just one man's heartfelt love letter to DC Comics. It's meant to bridge the gap of the golden and silver age of superheroes, intertwining it with American history, and it's supposed to give you that same feeling of hearing John Kennedy's speech, and it really gives you that feeling. So there is an older Absolute that doesn't collect the New Frontier special that was added in. So this, the newer version, is the one you want to get that has the 6 issues plus the bonus issue. But New Frontier, I mean, I've talked about it before. It tells American history interwoven with the DC heroes. It's my favorite origin of Hal Jordan. It's my favorite origin of John Jones. If you want to see my favorite DC book for each DC character, you can watch that video here. But New Frontier is the Absolute I've read the most times. I read it at least once a year. and it made me fall in love with not just Darwyn Cooke's writing, but Darwyn Cooke's art and the DC heroes. I love that in the climax of the story, something happens to Superman, which causes the other heroes to need to step up and be creative and use their ingenuity and use characters you might not think of. And it is just a love letter to every DC character, big and small. There's amazing moments. Like, I love the way he draws Wonder Woman as this imposing force towering over Superman. I love the panel that shows Batman meeting John Jones or Robin meeting Superman. It is an incredible story. I could go on and on about how much I love it, but you need to read it for yourself. And that is my list. This was hard. I mean, I thought about doing a top 12, but Omar already did that. I didn't want to copy him. But yeah, I stuck to top 10, unless you count me cheating with The Crisis and cheating with Sandman. But New Frontier is my favorite of them all. Now let's jump into my final thoughts. And that's going to bring this video to a close. I want to thank you all so much for watching the whole thing, or skipping ahead to the end to see what my 10 is without having to watch the whole video. But if you liked this video, if it was as fun for you to watch as it was for me and Jordan to make, go ahead and smash that like button, click subscribe, ring that bell for notifications so you don't miss any awesome content from us, and comment down below what your favorite absolute is. I want to remind you guys, we have merch, we have a Discord, and we have our sponsors, Organic Price Books. There, if you want to pick up any of these books that are still in print, you can save $2 with the code Braveboys. There'll also be a link down below. Or if you want to buy 4 or more, you can save 5% with the code Braveboyssit. Thank you all for being the most amazing friends in the world, and keep reading and stay brave.